I'm really great pleasure to be here today. I'm Eric Everson, and I run product strategy at Amazon Studios. I have this question for you. What would happen if one of the largest tech companies in the world actually launched TV and a movie studio? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Does that sound all right? Yeah, interesting question. All right, so this is about our topic here today, which is going from e-commerce to a next generation studio. And this topic that I absolutely adore that we've been talking about all day, which is imagination to action. And if you could think about our industry, this is what we think about every day. This is a very difficult equation. And this is something that every single one of the producers in our industry, this is what they do. Lindsay, I don't know where you were out there. We were talking about the difficulty of this, where it can take years and years to take an idea and finally get it pitched and finally make it happen. This is not just a part of what Amazon does, this is a part of what entertainment does. This is a hard problem and it's hard to get through. So I'm really appreciative of the fact that we're taking time to take this, to talk about this today. So what are we going to talk about? Just 3 topics. One, just a quick background of myself and Amazon. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Amazon approaches solving that problem. And then we're going to talk about what happens when you take those fundamentals and move it over into actually creating kind of a next generation movie and TV studio. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I went to Pepperdine University and I actually studied music composition, and I was on the debate team, which made me a very weird person on campus. But later on in my career, you can see that's probably been helpful to some of the things that I've done. For any of you out there that have kids that study music, I always make this pitch, but I consider music one of the world's first programming languages, and it's a really great way actually to learn about all the concepts of programming in a very creative way. And I've actually found that that's been a very important part of my career and my journey. In this middle part, I just always like to have a little fun here because our industry is very much a relationship business, and no matter where you are in the world, it all kind of connects. So I spent a fair amount of time at Sony Pictures. I was there 17 years, when then I had a chance to go over to Creative Artist Agency, which is an agency that actually puts a lot of top talent in a lot of the shows that we worked on. So a good example of that is we had a show at Sony called Jerry Maguire, and then I went over to CAA, and one of our clients was Tom Cruise, who worked on Jerry Maguire. And actually CAA is weirdly just right up the street, so if you're in Culver City, there's a road called Motor, and it connects actually the Sony lot with the Fox lot, and CAA is across the street from that, just to kind of give you a sense of things. All of the area that Sony sits on today used to actually be MGM, when a long time ago, there's a lot of film lots there. And actually back in 2005, Sony Pictures acquired MGM, and I worked on that, actually with a colleague of mine here that's in the audience. I eventually went on to AWS, where I was the CTO for media and entertainment there, and then on to AWS because I had this great opportunity to go think about what a next generation studio would look like. And the 2 things that are really funny about bringing it all together and how things are connecting, a few years ago, Amazon bought a lot that Sony moved out of, leased a lot that Sony moved out of. And then this last year, a year ago, Amazon Studios acquired MGM Studios. So I am literally at the same place, physical location I was 17 years ago, working on the same project I did 17 years ago, which is the integration of MGM. So there you go, the movie business, all in a nutshell. I've showed this up here. Everyone in my family is in healthcare except for me, so we have some great healthcare panels, so I will tell you I actually understand what you work on. So this is a family portrait of me and my family. Definitely the black sheep of the family. But I would say if you work in healthcare, there's a lot of analogies and similarities between media and entertainment and healthcare. So the talent, like a physician in healthcare, are pretty decentralized and have a lot of power. And the talent in media and entertainment is also very decentralized and has a lot of their individual power. And you have consumers all over the place, and it's a very interconnected world. So there's a lot of similar challenges that we have, and you will find in that industry. All right, so quickly about Amazon. You all know the big story. Founded in 1994, started shipping books in 1995. To give you kind of a sense of timelines, AWS launched its first services in 2006, which was actually the same year that the beginnings of Prime Video started. So hopefully that kind of gives you a sense of the big Amazon. And you all know that Amazon is in a lot of businesses, and I hear you speak about that when I have dinners and cocktail hours. But You might not realize how much it's gotten into over the years. So if you go all the way around, and I know I just heard it on the panel discussion here a little bit ago about Amazon also being in healthcare, which is true, and also it's in groceries as well as being an e-commerce giant. I'm focused in the top part, which we talk about our global media and entertainment businesses, and these are Prime Video, music, games, Twitch, Audible as kind of media and entertainment company businesses. So that's where I sit. And then Amazon Studios, of course, is providing original content for Prime Video. So why does Amazon care so much about driving imagination and into action? And I made this particular slide about 12 years ago, and I always kind of hung on to it, and I make teeny updates to it. The list should get updated, but I actually like it just the way it is because of its historical reference. But this is really interesting. Like, if you go back in time about 10 years, there was only one company on the Dow Jones 30 that actually had made it 100 years. So these are the most capitalized, successful companies in the world, and they continually fail, right? So this is like a really big problem. And then, of course, after I had made this, then actually GE got delisted from the Dow Jones 30. So now there's 0 that have actually made it 100 years. And if you ever hear Andy Jassy speak, I'm not playing the video, so don't worry about it. I took a screenshot of this. But you took one action item. I'd like you to take an action item, go to the Andy Jassy, you can watch it online, and go to the 2020 reInvent speech, and just skip to the 6 minute and 25 seconds. He goes on to this is why he was still at AWS, and he goes on to a discussion about why it's so critically important and very, 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 very hard to continue to reinvent as a company. And he's very passionate about it. I have a couple other friends in the room that know Andy Jassy. He absolutely thinks about this problem, and Amazon thinks about this problem. It's that previous slide. We know that previous slide happens over and over and over again. So what are you going to do about it? And if you don't believe how much Andy and Amazon believes in continuous innovation, this is a super interesting chart of just AWS. These are the number of service feature launches or major feature releases inside of AWS year after year. So starts in 2008 on this chart, so AWS started in 2006. But look at the scaling. So what this means is literally a new feature launch or a service launch year after year. This is watching innovation in action. That's an incredible scale of innovation just within one of the business units. So I think we could all probably agree, and you watch Amazon, that it's not a matter of if Amazon believes that there's a need to innovate and think big and whatnot. But I think the question that got me really interested about wanting to be here today, and remember, I'm a musician, I'm a composer, I live through trying to take like ideas and turn them into something. I think it's a super fascinating and hard problem. It's about how to do it. It's about how to do it. So I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time, and if you took anything away, I really want you to kind of think about this after being almost 3 years in Amazon. It's been quite the interesting journey for me, but the more time you spend inside of Amazon, you realize how deeply the entire company has thought about this from day one. And so I actually picked one word that I'm going to use. It's the only word I actually want you to remember from my entire presentation today. It's the only word that I want you to remember from the presentation today. And I want you to guess in your mind what you think the one word is I am going to say or present on the next slide that talks about the key differentiator of why Amazon is able to continue to take this equation from imagination into action. And you're probably not going to guess it. And you might think of like customer obsession, and I give you big points for that, for the customer obsession. You might say think big, and we're going to talk about that. But you might be surprised that this is the word that I'm going to pick. And it's the word mechanisms. And the longer that you stand at Amazon, you realize that nothing the company does is by accident. Nothing. And it's not just me saying this. This right here, if you didn't listen to, again, anything else, and you just wrote down one quote, I cannot tell you how pervasive and powerful this one quote from Jeff Bezos is. Good intentions never work. You need to have good mechanisms to make anything happen. Okay? We are now going to talk about, I'm going to give some examples of what that looks like. inside the company, and I encourage you to steal any of these because Amazon's pretty open about this, and probably the vast majority of you in this room are customers of Amazon, so thank you if you are. So what is a mechanism? It's a process, it's a technique, it's a system for achieving results. And if you look at our leadership principles, you'll say deliver results as one of them. So let's talk about mechanisms at work. First of all, we have 16 leadership principles today. This is not the 16 same leadership principles that started with the company. One of the things that this company does, our company, is it continues to reinvent our leadership principles. And if you look at a lot of best practices where you call it core values or principles, you have to have that bedrock to be able to move from. What's so interesting about this, and you can imagine this whether it's in your teams or in your family life, however you want to look at it, you can have good principles, but if you have no way of implementing those principles into anything, those principles are just talk. And you've probably seen that in your workplaces from time to time, and it probably frustrates you that that's not the case. I will tell you, from being inside of Amazon, these words on this page are said by all of the employees multiple times a day. There is not a day that goes by that I probably do not use the words work backwards from the customer in my own language. And I have a couple people in here that can say that, or the words, even the words frugality, especially in a year like this year. Earns trust. These are big, big words. Now I'm going to focus just on 3 of them really quickly today because there's a lot here. I recommend you go to the Amazon website if you're curious on them. I will tell you personally, there's not one of them I don't think is absolutely a brilliant way of working in your life and as a company. These are powerful leadership principles. So the 3 I really want to focus on is invent and simplify, is related today. Think big and bias for action. Now, if you think about the topic for today, the topic for today has to do with imagination to action. What is it? What do you see right here in the Amazon leadership principles? Next to each other. Think big, imagination, and bias for action. As a part of the core principles of the company. We talk about these on an everyday basis. But I think the thing at the bottom is LPs are embedded into everything we do. We're going to talk about talent management in a second. But you cannot move forward in your career without being able to do these leadership principles. That's a mechanism. These are a powerful part of our mechanisms. The other one that I will just throw out here because I love it so much, and you probably you probably see it on the page and you're like, well, I don't know if I like that one. The one I put out in purple has actually turned out to be one of my favorite because you have to read the rest of the sentence. Leaders are right a lot because they are willing to disconfirm their own beliefs. Leaders are right a lot because they are willing to disconfirm their own beliefs. What does that mean? You're listening to a lot of other people around you, and you're getting a lot of feedback. That's what that means. So that plays a pretty big role in this, but this is, I have to call that one out because that one gets misunderstood a bit. All right, so the next thing you would do if you're going to really try to drive this forward is you need to have key cultural traits and mechanisms in place. So, we have things like day one culture that we talk about, experiments that we talk about. And by the way, if you want to move some easy trick, if any of you are feeling like you're being blocked at work, this is one of my favorite tricks, use the word experiment. It freezes people. You're like, no, we can't do that. No, I just want to do an experiment. Who's going to tell you no to that? Nobody. These are words that we use inside of Amazon all the time. Experiment is one of my favorite words. And two-way doors. So we use this all the time. So thinking in terms of two-way doors. In other words, can I come back from this decision? Can I come back from this decision? We use that in our language. So in other words, a one-way door, I'll give you an example of a one-way door. I have $1 million, I go out into the harbor out here, and I drop it out of a boat in concrete, and it sinks to the bottom of the ocean. I'm probably not getting it back. That's a one-way door, right? Right? Two-way doors is I jump in to see if it's cold, and then I can come back out and see how cold the water was, right? All right, so a lot of the work that we do, think about how you can make that from a two-way door decision, or one-way door decision to a two-way door decision. So I'm not going to go into those details. The ones in green, though, I'm going to touch on a little bit more detail. All right, so first of all, this is a 1-2 punch. How many people own one of these? It's the Amazon Fire Phone. Raise your hand. How many own an Amazon Fire Phone? You don't? Oh, come on. Right? This is something that we get taught right away when we started Amazon, and is this particular story about the Amazon Fire Phone. And it's all about embracing failure. Okay, and one of the key parts about embracing failure is realizing that you're not going to, it's like being in the movie business. It's a portfolio business, so you're not going to be perfect every time. And I think the key part of this is, if you actually listen to the rest of the story, does anyone have an Alexa device in their hand? Or in their house? Alexa device in their house, or they work with? Yeah. How many of you know that the Alexa device is next generation from the Amazon Fire Phone? There you go. So this has to do with being able to embrace failure, learn from it, keep going, and move forward. We don't get it always 100% directionally correct, but we do a pretty good job of that. Now, guess what? We even have a mechanism for failure inside a company. It's called a COE, which is a challenge for a lot of you because COE is Center of Excellence everywhere. Inside of Amazon, it's a big adjustment for people coming to from the outside. It means correction of error. And we have to answer the 5 whys. Why did it happen? And go through and deep dive into that. But it's a pretty fascinating process going through it. We run that every week in Prime Video. And it's a learning process. In other words, we embrace failure. And there's a mechanism for teaching failure that's okay, and there's a mechanism for addressing failure that's okay. Does that make sense? That's a mechanism. I really want to, if you don't believe me on this mechanisms bit, we have a process for onboarding called Embark. Every one of the things that we're going to be talking about is taught in the Embark, and they are listed out in a process, and they have the ability to take you through every leadership principle and all of these really interesting cultural traits. When I started, I had 78 Embark tasks. I had no idea how I was going to get through them. To give you an idea how seriously that we take this onboarding process inside of Amazon, I went in to talk to some of my fellow colleagues who were solution architects, and I said, I was complaining. I got 78 Embark tasks to do. I don't think I'm ever going to get through it. I think I'm only through half. And they're like, you only have 78? He says, I have 178. And then the next colleague says, I have more than 200. All right, so this is how important, when it talks about being intentional about culture, that Amazon takes it incredibly seriously as a mechanism to make sure that everybody that's working in the company understands the leadership principles, the mechanisms that we have, and the cultural traits out of the gate. We take it seriously. In fact, if you're a solution architect, there's a mechanism for your onboarding that you cannot go see a customer until you actually have passed a test with other solution architects. That's a mechanism. Talent. You can't get hired into the company without going through the loop process that you've probably heard of, the famous loop process. And you can't make it through the loop process without aligning to the leadership principles. You can't do well in the annual talent review process without aligning to the mechanisms and the leadership principles. And you cannot get through a promotion or the promotion panel, because that is also a mechanism, without doing really well in those things either. All 3 of these are also mechanisms. They are mechanisms to reinforce the leadership principles that we have, which guarantees that the company continues to raise the bar and continues to drive innovation. Probably one of the biggest things I see that trips people up in all 3 of these is, in fact, thinking big and bias for action. That is how strongly those particular LPs are focused on in the mechanisms that we have in the company. This was a super interesting one. If you've never read this book, the originals, if you have, raise your hand. This is an awesome book. Just write this one down. This is the second thing that you've got to take away. A tremendous book. This actually talks about, today we talk about imagination, and we also talk about taking to action. This really focuses on the process of novel ideas. And novel is a word that we use inside of Amazon. When we talk about think big, we use the word novel ideas a lot. This actually focuses on what novel ideas are and how to go about them. And so one of the things that's really interesting about where novel ideas come from and how you work with other people to generate them is the fact that you get people that are not overly entrenched in looking at the process the same way over and over again. So if you look at the history of time, and this is one of the things that's studied in this book, it actually proves out you get a little bit more diversity on the team and diversity of thought. You actually get better and more novel ideas and more creativity out of that. Makes sense, right? We have mechanisms in place inside of Amazon to ensure that employees move around and actually cross-pollinate. So we have groups called the technical field communities where people are allowed to go outside of their industry and actually do some work on someone else's industry working on a customer problem. We have resource sharing and away teams that allow resources to go from one team to another team and come back again. That's a mechanism to drive more imagination and creativity inside the company. It doesn't happen by accident. Working backwards from the customer. Probably a lot of people have heard us on this. I'm going to make one double emphasis on this one. This is an incredibly important tool and mechanism and belief that we have. But this really has to do with being really, really good about not just talking to a customer to get an order. You're talking to a customer so that you can think deeply about what they actually need. That is actually working backwards from the customer. And we have a series of processes and mechanisms to teach this, and there's whole training courses on working backwards from the customer. That's how deeply and passionately we think about that one. And for external customers, and if you're a customer of AWS, I highly recommend you talk to your account manager about this. They have a whole entire executive visioning program that they use to take all of these things, same exact principles, and go out and work with you to actually walk you through all of those things. And that too is a mechanism that Amazon has internally to work that and help you with you. So we're going to talk about the next one, which is, if you don't believe it, I cannot emphasize enough how important writing is as a mechanism, because if you do so much of this at scale with so many people, you really have to have that ability to be really, really good at communicating ideas at scale quickly. Our mechanism for that is writing. Well, if that mechanism is a really important mechanism for us, then we put other mechanisms in place to make sure we're really good at that. So that includes actually having a handbook for that, standardized doc repositories for that training. It is assessed. It is considered in all of your promotions, and we even have a bar raiser program where you can go out and reach out and get helps on your doc with a whole library that's behind it and making sure that you know how to write the right kind of documents. Which brings me to this one, in particular. So this is one, if you've never heard of it, have anyone heard of the PR FAQ? Very good. This you should write down. You can read about it online. There's people that have left Amazon. I put like some of the key focuses on here. This, in a nutshell, is taking imagination into action right here. This is at the crossroads of it. Every major innovation that you see coming out of Amazon, I will tell you right now, has one of these behind it. I have multiple of these going on right now in my own portfolio, right now working on these. What is it? It's writing a press release about the innovation or the innovation idea that you have or the program that you want to do. And you're going to write a press release in the future. And what you're going to do is explain what it is, what the customer benefit is from that. You're going to have some quotes in there. And the most important part of this is that you're going to have a list of frequently asked questions that you're going to answer that explain and remove all the barriers from you to adopt the thing that you would like to do. And it's not just about the PR FAQ. This document gets socialized over and over and over again inside the company. And so by the time you get done, you've almost addressed every single possible complaint and reason that someone would have not to do something. And here's the real interesting thing. Anybody in the company can write a PR FAQ about anything at any time. So imagine the power of enforcing that mechanism inside your organization. So if you still don't believe me about these mechanisms, how important it is, Prime Video exists today was the result of a doc, and then another doc was written for the existence of the company that I work at Amazon Studios. I am telling you, everything happens through a mechanism, and it works. All right, so about Amazon Studios, real quick. These are some of the favorite shows that I like to watch at Amazon Studios. One of the things that's pretty interesting is to see how much global scope and scale we have. So if you think about the work that we do at Amazon Studios and Prime Video, we are in about 240 countries and territories worldwide. We have over 300 shows that we're doing at any given point in time, which means that we're pretty much releasing a new product every day in multiple countries in the world and multiple languages of the world. And then Prime Video has kind of its scales, but we're focused on the original production for that. And in particular, the Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power really kind of stretched a lot of the work that we had done as Amazon Studios, where we pretty much was like producing 6 to 8 major feature films, all in one sitting. That took about 10,000 visual effect shots over 20 different visual effects houses to actually pull that together. And the thing that was super interesting about that is that was done during a global pandemic. So if you think about the problem that we have in our entertainment industry, is we have a lot of products, we have a lot of producers and partners everywhere, and our products live forever, right? So if you think about wanting to watch a show that was produced a long time ago, so what would a next generation studio look like? Well, we're dealing with a lot more complexity than we ever had before. So we've always had like the issues that we had on the previous page, but we're doing so much more content, so much faster. But especially now post-COVID, the artists are all over the world and they're using more tools. And we just talked about how quick AI is coming in and other tools that are kind of evolving in our industry. So it's pretty tough. And so the question is what are you going to look at? And by the way, this is Amazon Studios in the background. I used to work in the building on the right, and now I work in the building on the left. But what would you do kind of in a next generation studio? And what I think I'll just do is kind of just focus on this, is we kind of simplified it down to 3 core tenets on the things that we would really want in a next generation studio. In other words, if you work backwards from your customers. So who are my customers? My customers are the consumers of our shows, the production companies that work on our shows, which is up to 40,000 people externally, and the executives inside of Amazon. That's my customers, right? That's kind of the studio's customers. Number one, we want to be responsible by design. In other words, we want to be thoughtful about how we are responsive with the shows that we produce and how we produce them. Being globally cloud connected, so in other words, that we can make sure that wherever you are working on a show, anywhere in the world, that we can kind of keep you connected. And then the last one, which is really interesting for us, is everyone's kind of dealing with workflows these days, but now with the introduction of artificial intelligence and machine learning into workflows, we're looking to have all of our workflows be smart. But the second one, which is really tricky in our industry, is what we call nonlinear. I'm going to have to go a little quick here because I'm at the end of my talk, but I do want to show you kind of one picture on that in a second. So on the responsible by design, this is something that I'm very passionate about, which is that we proactively actually have speed bumps in before we greenlight shows now to actually assess the DEI and A characteristics of a show and actually think about the shows that we're making so that they actually reflect the consumers worldwide of the shows that we're trying to make. And we're spending equally as much time actually trying to be really creative on what kind of environmental impact that we could reduce in productions as we bring them forward. Globally cloud connected, I think you got that, but you can imagine on a show like Rings of Power that was shot during a pandemic and people couldn't get together, how importantly this is, as we're kind of getting global artists that are working on our work. But the smart nonlinear workflows. So I saw someone else using this kind of chart here earlier, but if you think about from pitch all the way to getting onto your television set, everything used to go in kind of like a waterfall manner, but that doesn't really happen anymore. And my favorite example of this is that we built at Amazon Studios one of the largest virtual production stages in the world. If you haven't seen that, I would go watch the show Making of the Mandalorian, for any of you guys that are Star Wars fans, but there's a great series out there on the Making of the Mandalorian on how to do that. But what the idea is is that you're actually using volume LED walls behind the scenes so that you get a natural effect. The problem that you would get in this particular setting is, if you can imagine with all the glass windows, in the old way we used to produce this, you'd put green screens up on all of that, and then in visual effects afterwards, you would replace the green screens with outer space. One of the things that we could do now, though, is actually put outer space outside the windows so that the actor and the actors actually look out at the outer space and actually interact with that outer space. But the second thing that's super useful about this is that, can you imagine what is going to happen when I put a bunch of lights on an actor or an actress inside of this environment and there's green screens everywhere? What color is the person's face going to turn? Green. Yes, that is a very hard problem to deal with in post-production. So that's kind of one example of one of the uses for it. But the second one, and I love this example from another production that we did, has everyone heard of Magic Hour? Does everyone know what Magic Hour is? It's about 1 hour where you get these beautiful, from a cinematographer point of view, moments to shoot. And it's very stressful because you got to get everything in. In virtual production, where we actually can create the full background, how long is Magic Hour? All day, as long as you want it. This shot, that is not a real sun. But we actually got a write-up in the Daily Variety for the amazing sunset shots on this one. So pretty cool stuff, and you can see there's the kind of the finished product of that, and you can see how amazing that looks. All right, so what has that done? That's actually turned everything into a non-linear workflow for us, where visual effects now happens before production, and all of those things now have to be synchronized, as you can imagine that. So imagine in a world where you're trying to do a lot of that, autonomous humans and a bunch of other things now coming into the production process. So that's what a next generation studio would look like. Think about what kind of mechanisms that you have in place in your company, how that's supporting that, so everyone feels the power of that. I would leave with that, and dream big, think big, lead from today. We're working on a next generation studio, so I would basically offer out to you, whatever you're doing in work, and I've heard some wonderful stories today, what's your next generation? All right? All right. Thank you guys very much.